Hi, this is Samuel Collins, your coding and billing expert for the American Acupuncture Council Insurance Information Network and Malpractice Carrier. Or what I'd like to say is your reimbursement specialist, because we have to make sure that as a practice, the survival comes from having patients and being reimbursed for those services. So, of course, I always deal with issues dealing with reimbursement, including insurance and otherwise. Well, what's going on for the new year is not only just some changes, but insurance verification. So, this one thing we want to focus on for the new year is to make sure, do we have the proper information about what the coverage is or is not for any particular patient? One of the things you may want to do is to set up a protocol to begin to re-verify insurances because there can be changes that begin first of the year. By example, for California, American Specialty Health is taking over several policies for Blue Shield of California. Not all policies, but many, which are going to have certain limitations. ASH was trying to do the same thing in New Jersey, but the Department of Insurance, Department of Banking voted it down. So you have to make sure to always get the proper information to know whether or not the policies are changing for your patients. Will the reimbursement stay the same? This is the part of insurance we don't like, but it's a very important step. So I want to give you some tools to help you make it work a little bit better. So let's get to our slides and talk about the new year and insurance verification. One of the things about insurance verification where people run into problems is they often want patients to do the verification. Many patients don't completely understand their benefits. Asking a patient to confirm their acupuncture coverage can be very risky. Patients often are only going to want to hear what they want to hear, not what was really there. In other words, a third-party biller such as yourself or a staff member is going to be much more skilled to know whether or not there's going to be coverage. By example, they may hear the term acupuncture coverage, but then the benefits could only be for anesthesia related to surgery. So they hear acupuncture, not the full story. Establish a verification procedure for your practice that will ensure you have accurate information that will assist you or your staff with the process to use and possibly using a form or a format for each patient. I suggest coming up with a short form. Nothing has to be fancy, but you want to get some basic information. Realize your practice is subject to HIPAA, and therefore you may want to incorporate into your patient information package forms or disclosures where you're going to start to get that information. And this should be part of your normal practice procedures that allows you to get this information easily. I'm going to suggest when a patient calls for an appointment, if you happen to use insurance, certainly always indicate billing insurance is a courtesy and that you don't accept all, but you certainly do accept insurance. But get the insurance information from the patient within the phone call. What I'd like you to do when they call you, get the information right then and there. What you want to do if they're coming in the office, though, or filling out a form online or in your practice, make a copy of the patient's insurance card for the file, both the front and the back. The reason you want the back side, often that's going to have the phone number, the address of mailing, and so forth. But what I'd like you to do is to attempt to get this information at the time of the appointment when possible. Once the patient is shown up, trying to get insurance information and keeping a schedule of 20 or 30-minute appointments is never going to work. So try to do it as much as you can prior to the visit. There's nothing wrong with you having a patient do the same information, but I wouldn't 100% trust that information. It's not a bad idea for the patient to get it, though, because then they can hear also about certain limitations if they're willing to hear that portion. On the card, though, is going to be a verification number where you can confirm benefits. And remember, you're going to look for the address where to mail the claims or the electronic payer ID. Now, many of your electronic clearinghouses will already have the payer ID, but I would also verify to make sure there's been no changes. We've recently had some changes for some carriers that have switched their IDs. Then from there, you're going to gather the information to complete the insurance verification. And this is where I really want to make an emphasis to you. If you call, that may not be very efficient because you may have to wait on the phone for an extended period of time, on hold, on wait, and so forth. So check to see if they have any online verification process, such as Availity or others. Sometimes these are less than advantageous because simply what you're going to hear is that there's acupuncture coverage. It doesn't give much more beyond that. So often you still may want to call to make sure, is there any additional information that we need? And that's the information I want to go over with you in just a moment. Also, always check when you're confirming benefits, is there any need for a referral and pre-certification? The only good news for a managed care or PPO plan, if you're a member of them, you should know what the benefits are because you signed a contract. And in those contracts, we'll lay out what those benefits are, what the coverages are. That being said, what's the first thing you have to do? Number one thing to ask is a real simple question. Does the plan have acupuncture benefits? If the answer is no, of course, we can hang up the phone and move on. But If they have acupuncture benefits, the next question is, does the plan require the provider to be a member of the plan? By example, if you have an exclusive plan and it does have acupuncture benefits, but the provider is required to be in network and you're out of network, the phone call can end as well because being you're out of network, there's no coverage. However, often most plans have coverage for both in and out of network. And I'll give you a quick warning. Often it may be better to be out of network for plans such as United Healthcare, Aetna, and Cigna because their benefits are better for out of network. I know that seems odd or really out of place, but it is true. So before you join, make sure is it exclusive. However, go to number 3 here and it says, are there any variations for in and out of network benefits? Sometimes plans may have a higher deductible for in network, out of network than in network. Sometimes it may be the same. So you want to find out what are the benefit differences. Also ask, is there any pre-certification needed? Some plans may allow as little as 5 visits, but after 5 visits, you have to pre-certify or send what they'll say as a medical necessity request. So you want to find out that information. Does it require it at the first visit? Is the 5 visits for the lifetime? Is it for the year? Is it per episode? But this way, you're going to know that way. If there's a pre-certification required, possibly your office may not want to do those. And by not doing that, the patient would understand there are no benefits. You also want to find out, though, is there any limitation for acupuncture payment by the provider type? Now, of course, according to the Section 2706 of the Affordable Care Act, it forbids discrimination. However, a plan could be grandfathered. And what grandfathered means is a plan that was in place prior to the implementation of the so-called Obamacare. And those plans can be exempt. And what this means is, for those that were practicing prior to 2012 and 13, many plans covered acupuncture, but only covered it when provided by a medical doctor. Now, of course, under this rule, they can no longer make that discrimination. If they are covering acupuncture, they also have to cover it for a licensed acupuncturist or a person performing within scope. So that's always something to find out. If they say they're not, I would verify, well, how is this plan exempt? But clearly, if a plan is covering acupuncture and they say by medical doctor only, that's not going to be our fight individually. That's something we do as a group, our state and national associations and so forth, but certainly something the patient should question as well. But bottom line is there acupuncture and is there any limit by provider type? Another big question that you need to ask is there any diagnosis requirements for acupuncture benefits? Some plans will give you a very plain statement that will cover pain management. Now, of course, what does that mean, pain management? What type of codes? So you certainly may want to ask, well, if you cover pain, ask what particular codes, or is there any list that we may have? I would say do not be shy in asking about specific diagnosis requirements. This is the practice tip I give at all our seminars. When you're calling to verify, you're already aware that maybe the insurance covers neck pain. Maybe a patient's come in, they work for the same company as someone else, and you've treated people from that company with that insurance for neck or back pain. Inquire about something else, shoulder pain, menopause, anxiety, whatever, sciatica. Realize that when you call to verify, they're not going to track whether or not you billed from that phone call that particular code. What I'd like you to do is build a list of codes that they cover. If you already know they cover neck and back pain, don't ask that again. We know they do. Check on something else. By example, Evacor, the company that manages many United Healthcare as well as Optum Health and some Blue Cross and Blue Shields, are beginning to cover things like menopausal disorders, anxiety disorders, strokes, irritable bowel, and so forth. So it may be worth asking. But I would say start creating a list of codes that are covered, and don't be afraid to start to focus on the things that you do or that you treat. In fact, if allowed, and the person will, maybe ask 4 or 5 different codes. Don't be shy again about specifying what type of diagnosis. If calling to verify and you know they have neck pain, anxiety disorders, certainly just redo it. Here's what I'd like you to do. Create a list of codes covered. This way your verification can also be based on claims payments. So by example, if they don't really give you a good list or give you any indication, once you bill the insurance and they've paid for that particular diagnosis, such as sciatica, M5431, put that on the list of codes that are paid. And if there's a code that they do not pay, then certainly list that on ones they don't cover. That doesn't mean you don't diagnose the patient with that, but you have to be honest with the patient and say what things are covered. By example, here's a list of codes for 2 different insurance companies. Now, I didn't list the codes, I just put the condition. For Aetna on the left side, you'll see they cover neck and back pain, headaches, nausea of pregnancy, TMJ disorders, post-operative dental pain, and arthritis of the knee or hip. And that's all they cover. If you code something that's not within these, they will deny. In fact, be very careful. Aetna will deny a claim even if you have two diagnoses that they cover, but the third one they do not. So be sure on the claim form, only the codes that they cover. Conversely, Cigna Insurance has over 500 plus codes that they cover. If you can think of any joint or extremity, they cover all those codes for pain. They cover all related diagnoses to the spine, including disc, stenosis, arthritis, and so on. They cover every type of sprain and strain. They cover nausea and vomiting, headaches, intercostal, and even chest pain. So this list is much, much broader and certainly a much easier protocol to be paid because they cover just a much bigger list. Now, one is different from the other. So you have to know that, by example, if you code shoulder pain to Aetna, not covered. But if you code shoulder pain to Cigna, they will cover it. And that's kind of some of the nuances that you have to learn by the experience of billing insurance and doing these verifications. The other thing we want to do, though, of course, in verifying insurance is, are there any limits to the benefits? Some plans will limit the number of visits that a person may have. And remember, the number of visits may be combined with other services. And we've seen plans where they'll say, we have 25 visits, and they relate it all towards chiropractic, acupuncture, and PT. The other factor you want to look at, is there any type of money cap? Some plans may have a limit where it's $1,500 per year. And you always want to check how much has been used. If a patient already has used up 20 visits and they only have 25, we have to know, of course, that there's only 5 left. Now, this is where insurance companies often will tell you this simple thing: this is not a guarantee of coverage. And they're not trying to lie to you per se, but they're giving themselves an out, because what if when you call, the patient shows that they have 25 visits left? But by the time the patient treats with you and you send a claim, potentially they had visits from another provider that were sent in. That's why they can't guarantee. So we want to do the best we can to know what these limits are. And again, keep a list. Again, I'm going to suggest for every insurance you bill, and don't be overly daunted by it. You're not going to bill as many insurance companies as you think, probably no more than 5. Make up a list of codes that you bill, codes that are covered or not covered, the amounts they allow, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can have a very good list of covered insurances for acupuncture, so that when a patient calls, you can say, well, what policy do you have? You can verify on your list if you've seen it. If it's one you've never seen, of course, we go through the verification process. The other thing we have to ask, though, of course, is beyond just acupuncture. Do they cover examinations? Do they cover physical medicine services? Now, not all acupuncturists will do physical therapy services, but you may. Do they cover injections? Some states allow injections, and if that's something you're doing, you certainly want to find out if they do. And of course, in 2020, they're going to have dry needling, and whether that's going to be covered. I will certainly say, would dry needling would be within the scope of an acupuncture provider? It could be. Certainly, it may not be what you would do commonly, but certainly could. So if that's covered, that's something you might do. So these are the things we definitely want to find out. And one thing to bear in mind, what if a plan says we don't cover examinations? I will say that seems to be outside of the law, because under 2706, the Equality and Non-Discrimination Clause says if you pay it to one provider, you can't discriminate against another. And certainly, almost all plans obviously would have to pay any doctor for an exam. This is where managed care comes into play. When you join an insurance, often when you join, you have given away some of your rights. And that right may be that we pay you just a per diem visit and not separate for exams. So something to bear in mind, if it's not a plan you're a member of, certainly they should be paying for all these services, assuming they're paying them for other licensed providers as well. Now, one thing that you want to verify as well, though, is the financial aspects of the insurance. You often won't get as good of information as you may think, but it's certainly worth asking. And one thing to avoid is the myth. The myth of insurance is when you call, they often will give you this term: we pay 80%. Now, when they say they pay 80%, always understand 80% of what? They're not going to pay 80%, of course, of $1 million if you were to bill that for a set of needles, but they're going to pay 80% of what they deemed as usual, customary, and reasonable, which means the average or typical fee in your area, which could be above or below what you normally charge. One of the things to do for the new year is to verify, kind of, do your fees fit within the average of your area? And there's a website insurance companies use that you also have access to, and it's called Fair Health Consumer. So that is fairhealthconsumer.org. And on this website, you can literally plug in your zip code, your common CPT codes, and it will tell you the average prices for that area. So that way, when you are going to, when they say 80%, it should be 80% of what you'll see on that site based on the usual and customary for your area. My big issue here is to make sure that you know what they're going to pay. And this is really part of the issues of dealing with insurance. Is it worth it for you to take it if the allowance for that is way too low? By example, the company American Specialty Health in some areas only pays $42 per visit to $49 for a complete visit. And you have to decide whether or not is there enough value there for you to continue your practice at those rates, because it's not going to be 80% of your usual, customary, and reasonable. Also, remember, deductibles can start over. Remember, the deductible, of course, is the amount that the patient pays for covered services. So if there's a $2,000 deductible, the patient must pay for $2,000. That doesn't mean the patient has to pay it per se, but it's going to go towards the patient's portion, and the patient can pay it over time. Clearly, when someone has that high of a deductible, it's more than likely going to be a cash patient, but certainly after first the year, after a while, potentially it may be met if they see other doctors. Something else you may want to look into, though, is deductibles sometimes have a rollover. If a patient was seen in a medical office or acupuncture office for that matter towards the latter part of the year, those amounts could be awarded to next year's deductible. So certainly something you want to find out, because certainly first of the year deductibles are going to be an issue, and patients have to be aware that their portions have to be paid. The other thing to keep in mind is when people call insurances, they'll often say, well, what is the copay or co-insurance? And often think they're the same things. And what I want to make sure that there's an understanding, copayment and co-insurance are different. A copayment is a fixed dollar amount. And this is because you're in network. So by example, if you belong to Blue Shield, maybe there's a fixed $25 copay. That way, when you're in network, the patient knows it's only $25, but of course you're getting limited reimbursement, but you're getting more patients, at least that's the hope. Co-insurance is a little different. This is the share of the cost the patient owes. When a provider is out of network, it's the entire amount. So by example, if I bill an out of network, I bill $100 and the insurance pays $40, the patient owes $60. You cannot write off the difference because you billed $100. The insurance just simply helps. So bear in mind, this is why often people will choose to go in network, because they know their fixed dollar amount might be $25 compared to out of network being much, much higher. But be careful when someone says copayment or co-insurance, don't get them conflated, because a patient may have a card that says copayment is $25. But if you're out of network, that copayment does not apply to you because there is going to be co-insurance. What's important to know is that at the beginning of the year, insurance policies may change. Take a quick perusal, a phone call, or if nothing else, the simplest way to bill an insurance, or to verify an insurance, I should say, is to simply bill it. So before spending a lot of time on the phone, just go ahead and bill the claim, because if you bill a clean claim, you should get something back within 2 weeks, no later than 4, even if it's billed on paper. Your goal is to make sure your patients are aware what their coverage is and is not. That way they can set up a financial plan with you as to how much it's going to cost them out of pocket. Of course, success comes from patients, and you want to make sure to create something for your office to know what is covered. Please create a spreadsheet. You should know what CPT codes and diagnosis codes you use regularly and whether or not they're covered by what particular carrier. If you really think of it, most of you probably don't bill that many different insurance companies, so it shouldn't be too hard to keep. Know about the payments and limitations of the plans, keep a spreadsheet, and just simply use it as a reference. So that way, when someone comes in with that Blue Shield plan or that Blue Cross plan or that United Healthcare, you can just refer to a sheet you've already done so that you don't have to repeat this process over and over. Realize once you've verified a plan once on one patient, when somebody comes in with the same plan, all you're going to need to verify is whether or not the policy is in force. Again, I thank you for spending some time with me. Please take a look. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and otherwise. And of course, take a quick look. How many of you have your own old bobblehead? We are coming, of course, to all across the U.S. with our acupuncture coding and billing seminars. They're certified. You get hours. But most importantly, for the American Acupuncture Council, we wish you the best. We want you to be successful. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. Look at our news section for what's coming up. And I thank you for your time.